Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as a panelist and may now speak to any other organizer.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon. 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 When it rains, it pours. Water's up to my chin. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Many men try to reach it. Many men have failed. Well, if you wanna get to heaven, you gotta raise a little hell. And I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. Facing on a sleepless night. Will you find me? Hope you find me. I'll be back home soon. When the sun rises, when the sun Well, try to catch me
Right. Welcome everyone to the Smart Energy Summit 2020-21. Demand side feasibility, the levers to emerge. I'm Michael Villa. I'm the new executive director of smartEn, Smart Energy Europe, the European business organization integrating all consumer-driven solutions for the clean energy transition. Thanks for joining our biennial gathering of the new energy business. We are very happy that we gathered more than 300 business representatives from multinationals, startups, research institutes, and academics. All together joining one-day events, which is going to be framed around the two major pillars. The first one is a visionary exercise. We are going to project ourselves at the end of this decade in 2030, and thanks to our business speakers, we will know a reality where every building, industries, and the electric vehicles will be able to interact in a flexible way with the system that they are connected with. And the second part of today's summit will be highly interactive, where participants will be divided in breakout groups to discuss about the levers to achieve that vision, to achieve that reality. But why is demand flexibility important? Why do we need more active participation of all end users in the clean energy transition? Well, because it ticks different boxes. It helps achieving different objectives of the European Union: digitalization and innovation. To start with, we cannot have demand flexibility without smart technologies or data-driven energy services. So it's going to boost both green and the digital agenda. Second one is going to support an increased decentralization, democratization, and empowerment of energy users to achieve climate neutrality. This is going to indeed empower all of us and all industries as well to shift from a centralized, passive role of end users to a much more active and dynamic and decentralized energy systems. It will help also penetrate more variable renewables in all end user sectors, being them electrified and being able then to interact in energy systems. And then demand side feasibility will help to achieve decarbonization, the climate neutrality objective in 2050 in a cost-effective way. We can achieve climate neutrality spending and wasting a lot of money, but by activating demand side feasibility, we can save a lot of resources from unnecessary grid investments or extensions and backup generation. The European Commission itself calculated in 5 billion euros savings that could be achieved annually by unlocking these demand flexibility at low grid level. So there is a lot there is a lot of potential for demand flexibility to emerge. And we want today's event, today's summit wants to give a clear signals to you policymakers, and in particular the Commission. Timing, so it's really accurate because the Commission is currently shaping a major package that could help boosting demand flexibility and the active participation of energy users within this Fit for 55 package that is going to be published in summer. So the gathering of 300 peoples is a clear signal to you policymakers to make sure that demand flexibility has a key role in this forthcoming legislative package. I would like to thank sponsors, because without them, it would have not been possible to have today's summit. And indeed, I want to thank individually AmpX, EVBox, Eaton, NLX, EPQ, Siemens, and Wolfgang. Thanks for powering today's summit. I would like also to anticipate some house rules. So indeed, you know, the platform that we are using is Tame. It's fun. Get comfortable with that platform. There are different opportunities to interact. If you have some troubles on how to navigate through this Tame platform, go on the frequently asked questions section in the lobby in case you have issues on how to use this platform. Questions can be also submitted throughout the entire event. Indeed, we wanted to have a good interaction with the audience. So indeed, use the Q&A box on the left side of your screen, and please do not use the live chat panel, so that indeed the interaction is going to be streamlined through that box. Participants will also be warmly invited to reply to polls. We are going to use Slido that you can access through your PC, your smartphone, or also easily using the QR code. So indeed, reply to these polling questions. And then if you have questions during the event or as follow-up, please do not hesitate to contact us. The Smart Energy Summit 2021 is also social. So we are going to use Twitter, and so do the same. Use the hashtag SES 2021 and the hashtag levers for DSF, demand side flexibility. So let's start now with the first slide to have a better understanding of who we have now as audience and why are you interested in demand side flexibility. You see here the questions. Please join slido.com on your mobile phone or on your PC and reply to these questions. You are working for a company offering smart technologies and or data-driven energy services, or you work for a business association or NGO promoting the green and digital transition. You are a policymaker, you are a journalist, you are a researcher, and or consultant. We are curious to know who you are, and indeed, we see some replies coming up now. Let's get indeed comfortable also with the use of Slido, because indeed we will use this tool several times throughout the day. So don't be shy. So different companies, as also we know from the registration, there are several companies joining. So the majority now is companies offering smart technologies and data-driven energy services. Good, good. So that is a first start of testing this interaction with the audience. And now, indeed, a short introductory bumper, and then we can kickstart our summit with the keynote speech. Thanks. So welcome back, and indeed, I'm very happy to have Christian Zinglersen, the director of ACER, the European Union Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, to kickstart our summit today with a keynote speech. Indeed, I will not lose more time, and indeed, I give immediately the floor to Christian. Thanks again, once again, for accepting our invitation. You have the floor, Christian.
Thank you very much, Michael. Let me just check at the outset that you can hear me okay.
Yes.
A year's collaboration on screen has taught me to ask that question in the beginning as opposed to the end. Okay, thanks a lot for the opportunity to kick off your summit here today. I have a 10-minute allocation, which I will slightly abuse a bit, just for full disclosure here at the outset. Maybe I'll go for 13, 14 minutes. I hope that's all right. You are, of course, debating a topic which has this luxury of being both, shall we say, politically attractive or politically sexy, and at the same time, at some points at least, quite technical. So coming to that realization and thinking about sort of a kickoff keynote, what would that seek to achieve? What should it seek to achieve? other than allow you a bit of a smooth transition from a morning coffee into another full day of screen time, as it were. And the way I was thinking about it, I would like to do two things. First, I'd like to offer you a couple of perspectives for looking at the role of demand-side flexibility in the next couple of years. So a few perspectives, which you will probably be familiar with. And second, to show what our focus and our engagement points are as ACER, that is the EU Energy Regulatory Agency, on demand-side flexibility over the same time span. So over the next couple of years towards that particular issue. And I will start, if I can get the keys working here. All right, and I'll start by just a very brief message of reassurance I get, which I would take is that I would make the assertion that most seem to get it. So given the scale and the speed of the energy transition, do we need most or not all hands on deck? That would seem to be fairly consensual. Do some of the sound, good old tried principles still hold true, at least at the very high level? Probably so. We aim for cost efficient, effective solutions, open to innovation, and avoiding incumbent bias. Would most agree that markets remain a key driver whilst regulation a key enabler? Probably. And do we need to build on an evolving internally energy market? I would think most would agree with that. So far, so good in kicking off. Now, starting then with some perspectives within which to view this role, and also the priority action for demand side flexibility, I would offer three, sort of the first part of my kickoff keynote here. And I'll start with this classic debate about the respective roles of centralized versus decentralized solutions. And here, of course, there is plenty of product innovation, business innovation, also market innovation going on, targeting decentralized, local-based, if you will, type of solutions. Whilst on the other hand, there are also other developments which would reinforce the notion, in my view, of sort of bulk power at huge scale remaining a significantly anchored, centralized asset or phenomenon, and transmission level approaches remaining very key. So not only or singularly, but certainly significantly. And just one figure that I picked up the other day, that some of the, shall we say, more recent hydrogen targets put forward towards 2030 will probably claim around 10% of power demand in and of its own right. That is unlikely to be met with distributed solutions only or nearly. And the offshore ambitions recently captured in the offshore strategy of the Commission are well, speaking about hundreds of gigawatts of capacity going forward, that is unlikely not to require very significantly centralized anchoring as such. So what is really the system of the future, I think is a really good perspective, other than, of course, the easy answer is it's very likely to be a combination of both. Right. Moving then to a second perspective, and flexibility, I think we can all agree, can sometimes be a bit of an elusive, maybe flexible term, if you will allow that. And so it's good to couch specific solutions or value propositions in terms of where we are for the different energy system needs as the energy system changes. So it's safe to say that under any sort of energy system scenario, retaining stability and security is likely to remain paramount. So that's a constant, if you will, but as the system changes, how to deliver on such constants obviously changes as well. So I think a perspective here is what is relevant in terms of meeting future stability and security needs from the perspective of demand side flexibility. That is a key perspective, whether it is much longer term in terms of contributing or informing adequacy decisions, or whether it's close to real time reaction and dynamic needs. I think that is a second perspective relevant for your discussions today. And that, while maybe it's a bit of a Bernal perspective, it leads me to a third perspective, namely that one's entry point or one's own perspectives on these types of broader discussions can frequently differ. And I say that not just because interests differ, that's very normal and logical, but more they differ in terms of where you stand can sometimes influence or depend on rather where you sit. And here I'll give a bit of a personal example. So roughly half a year before I started in my current job as Asia Director, I was in Hainan, China. And I was there as part of my past job with the International Energy Agency in Paris. And Hainan, China had a so-called New Energy Vehicles Congress. It was a huge thing, biggest in the world, I would assume. All the big Chinese automotive manufacturers were there. Chairman of the board of Volkswagen, BMW, etc., were there too. So it was a huge thing. There's a lot of focus, obviously, on innovation in the electric vehicle segment, on cost, on range anxiety, digital interface, consumer experience. You know, will we be developing the next mainframe on wheels, as it were? And there was absolutely zero about the interaction with the power system, which I found amazing. Coming to this from sort of the energy side, I thought this would be the talk of the town. But it wasn't. There was no talk at that time, and I think that led me to do a bit of reflection and impressions about these different perspectives. What are we genuinely talking about when we talk about some of these assets going forward? So to sum up in terms of these three admittedly quite broad perspectives, I would say first, the relative role of centralized versus decentralized assets, how to look at the respective role of, say, bulk power versus local balancing. Everything is unlikely to revolve around one or the other. It's probably a mix. Second, energy system stability and security remain constant even in an era of rapid change, and who may or should even be coming to the rescue, so to speak, in a system which is rapidly changing. A lot of thermal generation is going offline, and one would need to rely on, shall we say, different service providers for both bulk power, but also ancillary services and the like. And where will a community then, such as yours, want to chip in, and what will that require for that to happen? And thirdly, this more broad perspective of that actually different perspectives and different entry points do play a role at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, much revolves around what problem is actually being solved. And so to give an example, just because person X thinks that electric vehicle integration is key and the ancillary service contribution of those EVs is paramount, and therefore is going to increase in importance, and therefore markets will need to remunerate that commensurately. That does not necessarily mean that the consumer, or for that matter, the automotive OEM, will have an exactly identical view. Maybe there are different consumer preferences at play where which may not necessarily go in the same direction. And if so, should one perhaps look more towards the aggregation of electric bus fleets or broader transport fleets or the like? Suffice this to say, sort of from my perspective, from a system stability or security perspective, so not just in terms of increased efficiency or increased market competition, I think from a stability and security perspective, the opportunities here certainly outweigh the challenges, and I tried to capture that via this brief mapping exercise, which was done in an electricity security report, which came out in the fall of last year by the IEA. And I think this speaks to, in some ways, that unlocking those contributions to system security, system stability, would almost seem a no regret, even if it's only from this particular perspective. Okay, now, turning then to the second half of this morning kickoff, what are some of our main focus areas as Acer as regards this quest, if you will, for increased demand side flexibility here in Europe? And I think it's appropriate to mention at the outset that we all, I think, are relying significantly on the Clean Energy Package, which was a significant step forward in this direction, whether it was on the operational side, the market design side, or to some extent sort of on the infrastructure side. So our focus as Acer is at least fourfold, and they are relevant for, shall we say, different parts of this flexibility spectrum that I was mentioning briefly before. And I'll touch upon these four areas briefly and separately. One is resource adequacy, another is monitoring barriers to entry or barriers also to small scale participants. One is looking at the current arsenal of EU network codes and guidelines. And a fourth is sort of this classic issue of how to look at infrastructure, incentives, and tariffs. So the first area which I would mention, which I think may be relevant for your discussions today, is resource adequacy, and not least the modeling to underpin the assessment of resource adequacy or inadequacy. So resource adequacy assesses the level of security of supply in the somewhat longer term, say towards 2030. And the clean energy package really brought in a step change in terms of a more Europeanized approach to resource adequacy, which then in turn could inform national resource adequacy assessment. This is very much about, shall we say, realizing the shared resources model across Europe, highlighting the benefits of increased mutual interdependence, and by doing so also paving the way for new technologies. And here it's very much relevant to include the benefits of demand-side response, as that can contribute significantly to resource adequacy. Hence, it can reduce the need for investment in various parts of the system, whether it's the generation side or the network side. And indeed, it can also increase resilience to extreme events. This is the stability and security perspective I was mentioning before. And if one wants sort of a recent brush up on that, we can look to the ERCOT situation in Texas, where increased demand-side flexibility certainly would not have saved the system, but arguably would have contributed significantly to lowering the quite dramatic effects of those events. So what that means then is that the modeling to assess resource adequacy would need to take different contributions into account. And what we have done as Acer over the past, say, 6-9 months in our decisions on methodologies here is to require all solutions to be placed on a level playing field for resource adequacy, and the forecasting, the modeling to be done to be robust. And of course, transparency and scrutiny of that modeling is key. And here there may be a role also for stakeholders such as yours to look at that. Secondly, another area where we will use sort of our different capacities as Acer to encourage change is on the monitoring side. This is the monitoring here of barriers to entry and also barriers to smaller market players that exist. And what we are tackling here is we're about to complete a study, which actually smartEn has also contributed to, which seeks to identify priority areas, perceived barriers to entry and barriers to smaller market players, seek to develop indicators for looking at those barriers, seek to identify relevant data sources and data contribution streams to inform those indicators, and then to bring out results and monitor those results on a yearly basis in our market monitoring report, which some of you may be familiar with. This we would want to do not just to identify and monitor, but also to be in a position where we can increasingly assess performance, but also suggest actions so as to reduce barriers to entry and barriers to smaller market players to enter the market. And so I would suspect that some regular interaction with some of you in the course of this yearly market monitoring report may be worthwhile, perhaps also seen from your end. Thirdly, this new area of work where we try to identify and monitor barriers to entry links quite naturally to the current discussion in Europe on how to reflect the need to enhance demand-side flexibility within our vast and elaborate EU arsenal of network codes and guidelines. And indeed, we expect some of the barriers identified in our own study to perhaps inform these efforts as well, to perhaps amend network codes going forward. And one example here could be, for instance, whether if there are minimum capacity requirements to participate as demand-side flexibility providers, and those requirements act as a barrier, maybe that's something which needs looking at. Now, here in the slide, I have inserted some highlights from a so-called asset study, which was done for the European Commission. I think it came out in November, and this focuses on the transmission and the distribution level, both parts of the system, for instance, on issues such as aggregation to be able to participate effectively in wholesale markets, and also looks at how to address local congestion management, as indeed those congestion issues are rising in significance. I find this study quite sophisticated, and I say that because it goes very much beyond the notion that I find demand-side flexibility important, hence it needs its own separate network code. This is a significantly more sophisticated study than that, so I yeah, we draw significant knowledge from it. We have a role in following up on this too as Acer. Currently, there is a task force-based work. It's a joint TSO-DSO task force-based work, which I think will produce a roadmap with some insights on this by summer, and that will be handed over to us for us to sort of scope possible rules, amendments, and the like on demand-side flexibility. We will do so during the course of the fall, and we will seek to involve stakeholders along the way, and then we would hand over some of our insights and recommendations to the European Commission for their consideration. So maybe this is an area which may be of interest for some of you as we move forward towards, shall we say, looking at how demand-side flexibility is tackled within this vast arsenal of ours in the EU of network codes and guidelines. And finally, I'll close with one fourth area of Acer focus. This is on the grid side, so this is, shall we say, perhaps more of a classical focus area. And one aspect of this is core work. It's how, from a regulatory angle in Europe, to incentivize, shall we say, the appropriate grid investment and grid operation. And here what I wanted to mention is that we will probably try increasingly to focus not just on this CapEx versus TOTEX type of divide, but going a bit beyond that to also look at more innovative and advanced transmission network solutions. We would like to see whether we can identify common regulatory best practice across Europe, where some of the operational efficiencies might be able to be incentivized further by remunerating for the benefits achieved, as opposed to the sometimes actually quite small costs incurred. And we would be very open to stakeholder input on those types of efforts. And the other part is more new, I would say, on distribution tariffs. This is a new area for us, looking more closely at distribution level tariffs across Europe. We published our first report ever on this, I think roughly a month ago. We'll actually have a webinar on that report on the 19th of March, should some of you be interested. And whilst the main focus of the report is more in terms of mapping and disaggregating the different tariff structures and logics around Europe, a huge exercise, by the way, we do have a few reflections on more forward-looking principles, such as how to link, shall we say, the principle of cost reflectivity of tariffs with the increased usage of time of use tariff principles. So this is a growing area of work for us in the future, and this could potentially also be another focus area for us, or an entry point, if you will, for this demand-side flexibility discussion in the years ahead. So all in all, this would be my kickoff for your further summit discussions. Partly some broader perspectives for the choice of focus you may have, partly some more specific areas of priority that we have as an EU energy regulatory agency, and we are committed to those priority areas, and we're also open for analysis and insights from stakeholders such as your own, and yeah, look forward to further collaboration. Thanks a lot, Michael.
Thanks a lot, Christian, for this keynote speech and very interesting insights on what is coming up. In particular, the methodology, the indicators, the plan for the network code for demand accessibility, and the remunerating, the benefits aspects for evolution from just a CapEx approach. Indeed, we received a few questions from the audience, and indeed we have a few minutes, so let's go directly to them. So the first one, I think that is related to the question that you asked: who should be coming to rescue? And indeed the question is on the basis of the experience that you have from your members, how buildings and so households seems to be the new players to actively participate and activate their demand accessibility. There is more experience for industrial demand response, but not that much at residential level. So what's your impression in that sense, and what could be evolved?
Thanks a lot, Michael. I think I would probably look at that chart, this time chart that I was showing before from Lawrence Berkeley Lab, And so I would think that there would be a significant contribution ahead for, I guess I would call it thermal storage from sort of an energy angle, but basically using the building's mass for shorter term shifts and shorter term storage opportunities. So I'm not the best to say whether that is in the minute to second segment, or it's probably more multi-hour to minute segment. It's probably not seasonal, but there would definitely be, I think, a significant contribution from the building's mass, and because certainly certain building mass is of a significant size and very significantly professionalized management, I think sometimes the consumer, the customer preference barrier is lower there. So I would expect this to be an increasing area of interest for portfolio managers, facility managers at scale, not necessarily the very small outfits, but the bigger ones.
Good. There is a lot of interest on these methodologies that are going to be defined. And you mentioned indeed the methodology for the resource adequacy. There is also a possible multiplication of the different methodologies, because there is going also to be defined a methodology for the European-wide system benefit cost benefit approach as required from the 10E regulation. Are going to be the same methodologies, or and actually how to ensure that distributed flexibility is valorized in these different methodologies?
Yes. So I think I would answer the question by saying that these should be taken into account, although they would be taken into account in different ways because the methodologies look at different issues. So if we take the European Resource Adequacy Assessment, this is basically an assessment, a very informed assumption about what the resource adequacy outlook would look, say, for over like a 10-year horizon. And there one would need to integrate the perspectives for demand side flexibility, albeit in an informed way. How to do that, which is, shall we say, robust in terms of modeling, is going to be a key issue. Also because I think those jurisdictions which have, we'll need to look at those jurisdictions which have the most experience with significant scale up of demand side response. And if we look outside Europe, I think it's mostly in capacity markets that they have been contributed very significantly, less so perhaps in, shall we say, in wholesale markets per se, in selling and shifting to power, the power balance. So this is one area. On the infrastructure side, I would agree, yes, that in a cost benefit analysis, one would need to take into account, shall we say, alternative ways to provide the same benefits, and that has a cost implication as such. What I was referring to in my slides is perhaps less in the last slide in terms of incentivizing the right investment and operation. It's perhaps slightly less on the CBA method, the cost benefit analysis methodology per se. I think that is a focus in its own right. What I was alluding to is that increasingly, irrespective of whether a cost is on the capital expenditure side or on the operational side, there is probably a distinct from that issue around innovative transmission operation solutions, where actually, from the point of view of the regulated entity, is simply, okay, will that cost be recognized? Is that part of the regulated base and so forth? Whereas actually some of these costs are quite insignificant, I mean, relatively speaking, to other types of costs. So that's not really going to do the trick in a classical regulatory landscape in terms of incentivizing if costs are very low. But if one could, shall we say, instead of looking at the cost, looking at the benefits and trying to incentivize through the benefits realized, maybe with some sort of share between the regulated entity and the ultimate consumers, that might be a way to go.
Good. We have different questions coming up, but indeed we are already going longer than the timing is foreseen. Just one concluding remark. So today's summit is going to discuss the different levers for demand side flexibility to emerge: targets, revenue streams, and modeling scenario. According to your opinion, what's the most relevant one for demand side flexibility to emerge?
Yes, thanks. I think coming from a regulatory agency, I'll be difficult to call on targets. That's probably more for a different type of audience. So that's the safe non-answer on that one. But in terms, I definitely think revenue streams and accurate modeling scenarios both are important. Perhaps the accurate modeling scenarios is for the longer term, but hugely significant. And the nearer term is, identifying the revenue streams and of course the market framework so as to tap or provide those revenue streams. I think that is very significant too.
Good. And then let's conclude with a self-assessment exercise, let's say. So after 10 years since the establishment of Acer, has the agency promoted enough the active customer participation in the clean energy transition, according to your opinion?
Yeah, it's difficult to in a community such as yours to say absolutely. It's a tough question. I would definitely concur. It has not had the attention that, shall we say, this focus on creating what I would call sort of the nuts and bolts of an integrated energy market across Europe has had. That is an integrated market at the continental scale. It has not had that. I think that is right. I think that was appropriate to give that effort attention, and to still do so, because we're far from done. I think we have been all right on that account. But as you're probably alluding to a little bit in the question, we are definitely attentive to the fact that as energy systems shift in Europe from an EU energy regulatory agency's point of view, this will also need to gain in prominence, and we will need to work with our partners and colleagues in national regulatory authorities to that end. And so today was a bit of a flavor of some of the entry points that we see immediately in front of us as an Acer, whether it's the longer term perspective or it's the, shall we say, the short term, close to real time market type of perspective. So if you ask that question 10 years from now, well, hopefully I can say we promoted enough, but I don't think I would be caveating, well, we had other things, other fish to fry. It would be on a more equal footing for the next 10 years compared to the first 10.
Good, thanks a lot. We have some technical questions and also some requests of sharing links to reports and everything. We will follow up bilaterally, and then we'll indeed provide these replies to the participants that asked these questions. Thanks a lot for the moment, Christian. Thanks a lot for your keynote speech. And now a few seconds break, and then Vision 2030 by our business speakers. Thanks a lot, Christian, once again.
Thanks a lot. Have a good summit.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Smart Energy Summit 2021, the Demand-Side Flexibility, the Levers to Emerge. My name is Alicia Medina. I am Business Development and Communications Manager at smartEn, and I am truly thrilled to be here today introducing our speakers of the Vision 2030 session, how buildings, industries, and vehicles would interact in a more variable energy system. We will have today 7 representatives of Ampex, Eaton, NLX, EPQ, EVvox, Google, and Siemens presenting their vision of a reality in 2030 where demand-side flexibility is fully activated. Before we move on to our first speaker of the session, I would like to remind our attendees that you can submit your questions through the Q&A box in front of your screen. If you also would like to share some event highlights on social media, please feel free to tag us and use the hashtags SES2021 and levers for DSF. Our first speaker today is Dr. Irene Di Martino, head of Ampex. Dr. Di Martino, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Hopefully so. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So very excited to be here today. And
Dr. Di Martino, I'm afraid that we cannot hear you.
Oh.
No,
actually, we can
hear you.
We can hear.
You can hear me, yes? I've got a microphone, which is excellent. And you should be able to see my screen. Okay, so I'm based in London. I lead Ampex, which is a fully owned subsidiary of AMP, established about 18 months ago. Been invited here today with other peers to speak about the vision of 2030, but before I do so, I'd like to provide some context and tell you also a bit about how Ampex fits into that vision of 2030. So clearly talking to an audience that absolutely realizes the key role that flexibility is going to have to play in order to cater for this unprecedented transition that the energy system has been going through. And indeed, if we look at the projection for demand increase by 2030, despite a slowdown caused by the pandemic, we're still tracking on an increase in demand that cumulatively will get to about 9% by 2030. So for network operators to be able to cater for that demand growth in amongst very ambitious targets that have been set by several governments in the remit of 2050 net zero, and having to cater for intermittency and non-readily dispatchability of renewable energy resources, we do need to look at flexibility. We do need to focus on non-wire alternatives. And there are some really interesting projections that I'm going to quote here from the UK that actually really give a couple of good data points to understand the role of flexibility. So we project in the UK that by 2030, the market opportunity around flexibility will be worth around £6 billion a year, and it should deliver to consumers benefits in the range of £8 billion a year. So that clearly says quite a lot around why the system operators and network operators are putting their focus on increasingly more on non-wire alternatives, and demand-side flexibility is certainly one of them, despite the fact that only around 2% of the global potential for demand-side flexibility today is actually being utilized. And I'm just going to quote here some other meaningful numbers to, again, provide more context as to where we are today and the amount of work that still needs to go into enabling that level of flexibility to be unlocked. We've got 200 gigawatts today of currently installed distributed energy resources across the EU. Only 20 gigawatts are monetizable flexibility from the edge of the grid. And of that, only 1.5 gigawatts is currently being used. And if we look at California as the lead country, the lead nation into demand-side flexibility, we have projections of huge savings of $15 billion saving per annum by 2030 if that flexibility is unlocked. Now, in 2020, definitely we have seen a number of initiatives around the world that have set the pace on demand side flexibility, or in general flexibility into wholesale market through capacity options. Again, California really leading the way with more than 30 gigawatts into the demand response, from demand response into the wholesale market. But even Europe is tagging along really nicely. And if we look at United Kingdom, easily a number of the Nordics, France and Belgium, we see, despite in different measures, but we do see system operators absolutely putting more attention and more efforts into sourcing capacity from demand response through perhaps VPP constructs and more so. And the same goes for Australasia, with Australia that is very reliant at this point on demand response through VPP for unlocking flexibility from behind the meter. Now, where do we think that demand response is going to increasingly come more from? Well, definitely, if we look at projections between now and 2040, we can see that due to the electrification of heat and transport, we're going to have buildings that are going to play a very big role into providing that flexibility into the system. We see a doubling of the current demand response by the time is, in 2 decades, and we see an increase of 30-fold from EVs. So when I stop and think about how buildings are going to play a role into providing flexibility, clearly everybody is familiar with how a building, whether it's residential or commercial, how does it behave when it's left completely unmanaged, whether it's commercial with a peak of capacity of demand around noon, or whether it's residential with different peaks, mainly in the morning and mainly in the evening. Clearly, this becomes a very relevant source of grid constraints for network operators and power generators to manage. So there is a huge amount of untapped flexibility behind the meter, but clearly there have to be measures that allow us to harness that flexibility. And we have been seeing increasingly more so in the last 5 years, energy efficiency measures that are put behind the meter in order to reduce those peaks in demand. They definitely contribute. We have also seen residential and commercial users that want to become more self-reliant, that want to be more in control of their generation, the electricity that they require, and therefore the on-site PV generation has been playing more of a role. But what does that do? It also creates another issue, especially for utilities and power generators, with the dark curve, which manifests itself mainly around noon in the day. So what do we need to do in order to make buildings, whether they are residential or commercial, in order to transform them into responsive assets that can actually play an active role into the energy system, into the markets? We need to really optimize the mix around energy efficiency, storage, on-site generation, and load shaping in order to really start flattening that load profile and absolutely unlocking flexibility. They can definitely play a huge role into addressing grid constraints around increased demand, and they can also be sources of additional revenue as well as sources of innovative new business models. Now, how does MPEX fit into this context of challenges around the energy transition and the need to unlock flexibility? We have been developing a very disruptive data-rich digital energy platform that caters for a number of interoperable products, and those include a piece of network infrastructure upgrade, which is our smart transformer going actually live in the UK in just a few weeks, a virtual power plant solution, a demand-side management solution, and we actually do see all these three products ultimately converging into what we call the transactive grid solution, because we strongly believe that the energy system is going to eventually land by 2050 into a status where the grid will be fully transacted. And by that, we mean that every form of distributed generation and load will actually be able, at a granular level, to play a contributive role into unlocking flexibility into the grid to ultimately provide system stability, to increase the resiliency of the energy system, and to allow for energy to be supplied at the lowest possible cost. So with that in mind, we have been building our system architecture thinking of transactive readiness, because we want to be able to future-proof our offerings for the different stakeholders that we actually address. And we rely on cloud-hosted advanced analytics. And one of the biggest differentiators of our products is the fact that we have autonomy at the heart of the technology. And autonomy means that all the different devices, all the different sources of flexibility which we cater through our aggregation management platform are able to actually make informed decisions. They are autonomous in that decision-making capability, and we then rely on robust machine learning algorithms in order for them to be able to do so. So if we think about what Christian was saying, the big decentralization and the increasing number of distributed generation at the edge of the grid, I mean, just to frame, in the UK about a decade ago, there were less than 100 generation points. I think it was about 80 quoted. In a decade later, today, there's more than 1 million generation points. So that just gives us the magnitude of the change that accompanies the energy transition in terms of decentralization, and equally gives us a sense of the imperative around being able to aggregate and optimally dispatch all those sources of distributed generation. So that's why we have been developing a virtual power plant solution. And with that, we basically will be able to optimally dispatch assets and reduce the exposure to merchant market risks for all the asset owners, the asset generators that want to rely on those assets to earn revenue. We have a transactive-ready platform that does that, and we also provide, through our advanced analytics, ways for asset owners and operators to track the life of those assets. When we think, though, about what I've just been saying, enable buildings, enable residential sector, as well as commercial and not only industrial players to really provide flexibility into the system, we need a very robust technology that underpins a demand-side management construct. So we've been focusing on a technology-agnostic, transactive-ready, autonomous solution. We want to target a variety of different loads behind the meter. We do know that clearly today the prominent loads are EVs and resi batteries, but they are not the entirety of the load landscape behind the meter. We want consumer centricity to be at the center of our offering, because ultimately what we're trying to do is unlock flexibility through end users at the edge of the grid. So we've been targeting a holistic energy management system that allows ultimately to harness flexibility from, home batteries, EVs, appliances, HVAC, and etc. What is the biggest challenge that we see around unlocking flexibility behind the meter and enabling that demand-side management to really play a role is the fact that if you want to ultimately cater for a granular demand-side flexibility, you need to be able to have interoperable constructs. You have protocols that allows the basically communication with different classes of devices to be by one unique protocol. At the moment, there is a very segmented, very fragmented market in terms of appliances, in terms of even batteries themselves. Therefore, that is a big hurdle for technology provider to be able to absolutely cater and unlock flexibility at a large scale. But the second and equally challenging hurdle that needs to be overcome in order to play with demand-side flexibility into markets is engaging the consumer without actually making them subject to a burden, because for us to unlock flexibility behind the meter, we need to be able to cater for preferences of the users. We need to not impact their lifestyle. So we have developed what we call Alice, which is an agent for lifestyle-based intelligent control of energy. It's a digital energy system behind the meter. And what it does, it leverages our advanced analytics, it leverages the robust machine learning that underpins our platform in order to optimally schedule loads behind the meter, and therefore enable the consumer not only to lower their energy bills and reduce their carbon footprint, but ultimately earn money from participating into demand-side flexibility markets. Now, what do I therefore see, and what does AMPEC see happening by 2030, which frankly, in the grand scheme of the energy transition and the pace at which it's happening, is almost like saying what's happening after tomorrow. We definitely see behind the meter flexibility playing more of an active role in providing local flexibility in markets and into the wholesale market. So relieving grid constraints and avoiding expensive network reinforcements. We have been seeing, and we think is going to absolutely continue growing, the VPP sectors for behind the meter solar plus storage assets. And we're seeing very innovative business models that come on because of the involvement of a number of stakeholders in that space. And those BBBs are ultimately the enablers of dynamic tariffs, dynamic time of use tariffs that pave the way towards transactivity. We need, as we said, technology-aided consumer-centric solutions, which we believe are going to be increasingly more present by 2030. And how is MPEX going to fit and contribute into that vision? We have been working, as I said, on a number of offerings. We believe that by 2030, we will be present with network infrastructure upgrades for our smart transformers that will also contribute to unlocking inertia and more flexibility into the system. We see us having partnered with retailers or retailers around the world in specific strategic markets, and I'm talking about North America, the UK, and Australia in particular, in order to cater for demand-side flexibility behind the meter, and definitely making sure that not only do we harness flexibility from e-mobility and electrification of heat, but also from a wider range of loads, which make that consumer experience all the better and not are constrained anymore into the participation of grid edge users into demand-side flexibility markets. So we will continue to be working to future-proof the grid to make our solutions ready for the energy transition that is going to, as I said, ultimately make sure that there's a bottom-up approach with grid edge and demand-side flexibility making a huge contribution into the system stability as a whole. Thank you very much for enabling me to share my thoughts about 2030. And
yeah, thank you very much, Irene, for your presentation and for giving us truly a glimpse of how you envision the future in 2030. I would like to allow the audience to submit a couple of questions through the Q&A box, but already we have a couple of questions. The first one would be, what do you think the major hurdles are to unlock demand-side flexibility at a large scale?
Well, as I said a few minutes ago, we see two major hurdles. One, which is the interoperability of devices, of protocols around devices, integration into technology platforms like ours. And we believe we're seeing in the UK base is being very active with British standards into trying to overcome that. And I actually believe that by 2030, we will be in a different position, thanks to the fact that software products, after all, don't follow hard engineering rules around standards. So I do see it as a current hurdle, but I do believe that by 2030, if we continue with the level of engagement that we are seeing ourselves in the UK, we should be over that hurdle. But consumer engagement definitely is the other one. Consumers do not want to be limited in how they go about their day, how they go about their energy usage patterns, because we need them to delegate that scaling of loads in order to harness flexibility. So we need to be able to engage with users without actually making them feel burdened by technology.
Thank you. For the sake of time, I will only take one more question. The next one will be, how would behind-the-meter metering work together with system processes of allocating and settling energy to the right market party?
Absolutely, we do need behind the meter. We do need smart metering, because we can't settle, we can't account for the flexibility contribution of each of the behind the meter nodes or micro nodes without having smart metering. So we do rely on that, and we are seeing, obviously in Europe, Italy leads the way with smart metering, but in the UK and equally in other markets, I mean California is another one of them, we see an increasing push towards smart metering. So there is. It is clearly a requirement. It is a constraint as it stands, but I think we can safely state that that is not going to be a limiting factor by the pace at which smart metering has been rolled out in a number of strategic markets that lead the way in demand-side flexibility.
Thank you very much, Dr. Di Martino, for your intervention. And I would like to welcome already our next speaker, Cyril Brisson, Vice President, Sales, Services and Marketing at Eaton. Cyril, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me correctly?
We can hear you perfectly, Cyril.
Okay, very good. Can you see my screen already? Can you? I think I accepted control, but
Yes, we can see your screen. You can hear you. And see you.
okay, very good. So, oops, sorry about that. Let's go to full screen mode. Okay, so I'm the head of offers and marketing for and sales for smartEn in EMEA. smartEn is an energy management company, a global energy management company that has a particularity to be present both on the electrical side. So we are making electrical components and systems going from the breakers you find in home to the substations that you find on the grid at the distribution level. And we are also present in transportation. We have been for a very long time supplier to the automotive, trucking, and aerospace industry. And so we are in a very privileged situation to use all of our technological knowledge on the electrical side to help the vehicle and plane manufacturers electrify their offers, which is quite interesting as a position to be. Our view of how we can contribute, how our sector, the electrical sector, the electrical industry, and other industries can contribute to Europe's net zero goal is about sectors coupling. And sectors coupling is a very simple concept, which is that we need to do two things at the same time. We need to make sure that we electrify directly or indirectly buildings, transport, and industry. And at the same time, we need to make sure that this source of energy, this source of electricity is zero carbon. So this involves obviously a deployment of renewable on the generation side, and also it will involve hydrogen and synthetic gas for some of the applications that cannot be electrified directly. Buildings can be mostly electrified directly for a large number of applications, but it's going to be more complicated for industry and transport. The estimate that we did a substantial amount of primary research with Bloomberg and Statkraft, and this research has estimated that more than 80% of emission could be eliminated via this sector's coupling. And here is the detail by sector. So really, you see that if transport will remain, dependent on some form of fossil fuel, and this will have to be decarbonized via synthetic fuel, and industry will also remain partially dependent for high heat industry on fossil fuel, or that will have to be decarbonized through synthetic fuels. Buildings can be mostly shifted towards direct electrification, and in some cases uses of hydrogen for some boilers. So there is a really big potential in a building to contribute to decarbonization. And the way it can help is not only by taking carbon out. The way it can help is also by helping to stabilize the grid. And we call the electrification of a lot of application everything as a grid, because our view is that the head of the network, where you will have generation and flexible consumption, whether it's industrial building, commercial building, residential building, should become cells, flexible cells in the electricity grid. And those cells will bring flexibility and resilience. So as you can see here on the left-hand side, you will have also some flexible asset at the transmission and distribution level. You will have that around large scale, grid scale storage. You will have that with grid scale renewable, but you will have that too at the edge. And here we will find massive sources of flexibility coming forward. Of course, you will have also generation at the end with solar, and you will have the capacity to be storing and using whenever you want the electricity coming from the grid or generated locally, either in dedicated storage system or in EVs, which will be the biggest source by far of flexibility. If you take a look at the amount of flexibility coming from, I would say, battery storage systems, or from the thermal storage, here you see thermal storage, which are heat pumps, or it can be also water boilers. This is going to be dwarfed by the quantity of batteries put on the grid through electrical vehicles. So it's extremely important to be able to incentivize this flexibility, to create open and transparent flexibility market. There was a question before as to what we see as the biggest obstacle to this takeoff. Well, we supply storage systems, we supply electrical infrastructure, and we supply charging systems. The biggest hurdle that we've seen with our customer all across Europe is the fact that they are not clear how they are going to be compensated for their investment in flexibility. Some markets, like the Nordics market, which covers Scandinavia and Finland, are extremely advanced. They have an open market. You can find traded flexibility products. Some markets are a bit more difficult to navigate, and the regulations are still changing. And so for us, it's absolutely critical to have the right, I would say, incentives in place in terms of consumers, in terms of end consumers, whether it's commercial building or industrial building or residential building, having the capacity to profit from their investment. It should be voluntary. They should not be forced to do demand response. We have seen some proposals of law in Europe recently that will enable, for example, some operators to shed demand without asking the consumer, which is the best way to kill this market. So it should be voluntary, it should be transparent, and it should be open for any firm and any asset to participate in the flexibility market. Again, we work with, this is another piece of work with Bloomberg, as to what the flexibility, highly flexible, highly coupled deployment of electrical vehicle and other assets could do. And you can see that by 2050, this could reduce the need for firm capacity by more than half. This will increase slightly peak demand, but it will also cut by more than half power emissions. So if we make sure that consumers are going to have an incentive to consume power when it's clean and when it's available, then they will invest in those systems. And they can provide a lot of services, not only demand-side response, frequency containment, reactive power. If the regulation are set properly, they can also make sure that they can participate in the market for reactive power that will become increasingly important as the proportion of renewable generation becomes 70, 80, 90%. And also they can provide resiliency and reserve and disaster recovery at the edge. So all of this is possible if markets are accessible, open, and easy to access for everybody. So really the market that exists in North Europe for us are an example of what we should be doing to incentivize people to invest in this flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyril, for your presentation. I already see some questions from the audience coming in right away. I would like to quickly go through them. So first question comes from the audience. What do you think vehicle manufacturers, electrical vehicle manufacturers should develop to allow demand-side flexibility to happen in vehicles to communicate with other parts of the system?
That's a very good question. We think there are two different answers to that. The first one is that there is a tendency today to go to AC instead of DC bidirectional. We believe that it will not be more expensive to deploy low power DC chargers in a lot of places. And obviously a DC-DC connection will be a much more efficient. So you will lose less, you will have less losses in the total cycle. So we think DC is a good way to go. But the other thing, which is much more tricky, is that you don't get a lot of information on state of charge of the battery and state of health of the battery when you connect a vehicle. So this information stays entirely on the vehicle, and the home or the building to which it's connected is blind to the state of charge. Having a better, I would say, communication that should be, of course, properly managed and anonymized, but having a better connection between the vehicle and the data on the vehicle and the state and the fixed charger and the electrical system of the building will enable to manage better the complete energy available in the system and enable to have a better V2G or V2X deployment, we believe. So more information, communication between the infrastructure and the vehicles will be important.
Thank you very much for that. I would like to allow one last question from the audience. They're asking, can you give examples of where flexibility markets are working well today here in Europe?
Absolutely. So we did a lot of research around the world, not only in Europe. And for us, the best flexibility market in market organization is the Nordic market, covering Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. It's extremely easy to access. You don't have heavy requirements. You don't have to cross a lot of technical threshold to connect. You don't need certification. You can participate easily. The products are standardized. This is so important. Instead of being just I would say, point-to-point connection where an operator, a system operator, an energy provider will give you a complex contract, which is his contract for flexibility. You have very standardized products. Those products are traded on an exchange, a flexibility exchange, which is called nodes. And you also have some derivatives. So it's pretty easy for investors to understand how they're going to be compensated. And it's very transparent and it's extremely stable. So transparent, stable, standardized, and traded. Really, for us, the Nordics market and the stock market that's attached, which is nodes, is by far the I would say the most transparent and the more the market which is incentivizing the more investment through transparency and visibility.
Thank you very much, Cyril, for your very powerful insights. I would like to welcome our next speaker, Daniele Andreoli. He is Head of Demand Response Solutions at Enel X. Daniele, the floor is yours. Hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody. So let me join sharing my screen. Hope you can see it. Please confirm.
Yes, we can see your screen. We can see you
Perfect.
and hear you.
Good. Okay. So let's go. Let me just briefly introduce Enel X. That it's a subsidiary of Enel. Enel X is active in the energy transition. So we are taking care of different customers, from consumers to municipalities and government, up to industries, businesses, for which we provide services from consulting up to energy management systems in order to optimize their energy usage, or we can build for them renewable or conventional power plants in order to let them become prosumers, or eventually develop battery storage solutions, or manage their flexibility, monetizing on the different energy markets. On top of that, Enel X is active on financial services, ultra broadband, e-mobility. So a great contribution to the energy transition, also a great contribution to the demand side flexibility, since we can aggregate different assets and bring them to the market. Which is our vision for 2030. So before going into predictions, let's start from some trends that are active today. That we know that there is this target of net zero emissions for the energy industry, in particular, that it's shifting completely the energy mix from an energy mix that was made of very few, very large conventional power plants, that it's becoming and will become more and more in the future made of a lot of different, very little and very widespread decentralized renewable plants. Some analysts are projecting these numbers up to 2050, and they are saying that in that years more than 50% of the global generation will come from renewables. What this will cause and is causing, but definitely what should happen in 2030, analysts are saying that more and more countries, mostly in Europe, but also in other geographies, these countries, they need to unlock more and more sources of flexibility and use even all the sources of flexibility. Once the renewable penetration, mostly of intermittent generation from wind and power, will increase more in their energy mix. So what this could mean? Probably that some forms of flexibility to which we are accustomed today may change in the future, may change in the next in these decades. Probably we can go to I can cite a study that also the director of ASER pointed to from the Lawrence Berkeley lab in US. They studied how California could arrive to 2030, coping with more than 50% of generation coming from intermittent renewable power. So they studied this how the country could evolve in using flexibility. And they're suggesting that in reality, demand response that today we see as more a reliability source, so more a substitute for peaking generation. So something that can be called very few times during the year in a very particular spike in the demand. In reality, the researchers are suggesting that demand response could evolve into a more, let's say, shifting load. So trying to accommodate load when there is a generous production from renewable sources. So that it's completely probably disrupting idea compared to what we are used today. But in reality, doing that, we can expect just benefits, since clearly the cost will be reduced, since the consumption load will be present when there will be renewable generation that normally drives the prices of the energy down. Clearly, the peak load will be reduced, since the peak will be moved around during the day, smoothed in a way. There will be reduced of curtailment from renewables generation, so we can use more and more generation coming from the renewable, avoiding to waste it through curtailment. And clearly also the emissions will be reduced, since we'll use more renewable generations against the conventional one. So they are thinking to demand response, evolving demand response disturb is more in as a substitution of storage assets rather than peaking generation as of today. So I think this is important also to imagine that some forms of flexibility that today are predominant as demand side flexibility could evolve, could change, and then we could unlock a great potential for the future. And always remaining to US, that it's a great market that, let's say, developed demand response as many years ago. Another study from Brattle, again, pointing how the system could be in 2030, is explaining that the market potential for flexibility could arrive from around 60 gigawatts as of 2019 up to 200 gigawatts in 2030. So you may extrapolate these numbers also for other regions, as Europe or others, in which clearly the potential for the contribution from these sources could be really substantial. Even just demand response could almost double its presence in the market in 2030 for these analysts up to 120 gigawatts. So an incredible contribution may be coming again from changing a bit the service that demand response could provide. The benefits associated to this contribution is really incredible, because it can be untapped like more than $50 billion per year by 2030 as a country benefit, the US. Benefits coming again morely in the next decade from avoiding to build new generation capacity, but using in a much more efficient way the assets already present and connected to the grid. And also interesting to see that again, contribution from regulation and policy measures is always important, but also something like 40% of the potential that these analysts foreseen in 2030 could come from, let's say, modernizing existing programs, trying to, let's say, upgrade what is already up and running, instead of just developing new ideas or new forms of flexibility or new rules. So putting all together, I believe that since we are going into a future in which the numbers of potential assets like electric vehicles or distributed generation that can give clearly a hand in providing services to the grid will dramatically increase into the next decade and also going forward in the next years. I believe that the trend of evolving single asset virtual power plants into a multi-asset virtual power plant, it's clear and evident it will continue to be there during the next years up to 2030. We know that VPP is the best cost-effective way to provide grid services. So it will be clearly challenging for aggregators to manage such a complexity, because we may imagine that the numbers of assets under management, also the difference of all the different assets that can be managed and can provide grid services may vary very much in the future. So it will be challenging, but also interesting, because at the end, putting together virtual power plant can contribute to give services to the grid instead of conventional power plants that are retiring. So we can contribute in general to the global decarbonization. So a lot of challenges, also a lot of possibilities, as we see, since the analysts are projecting a future in which demand-side flexibility can really play a substantial role into the energy transition. A lot of challenges, but I'm sure that it will be fun and we'll enjoy going through it. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take some questions if there are some curiosities.
Thank you very much, Daniele. Thank you very much for your presentation, your very valuable insights that you provided, and of course for sharing the challenges and possibilities that you see for NLX for 2030. I would like to indeed take some questions from the audience. The first one would be, what are the main challenges aggregators like NLX face while moving towards a mixed asset virtual power plant?
Yeah, indeed, nice question. I would say that clearly technology is always a challenge, because you are facing with different assets, different markets, etc., etc. Today we are present in more than 15 countries. We operate a portfolio that is more than 6 gigawatts worldwide. So clearly the challenge is facing with different rules, different assets, different markets. But most of all, the regulatory framework, it's sometimes really challenging, because you cannot find in 2 countries the same rule. So you need really to adapt to different requests, different rules, etc. So maybe also in some regions, and as Europe, harmonization of market rules, etc., would be very beneficial for both big but also little or medium aggregators that can really unlock potential from the demand-side flexibility if rules would be a bit clearer and sometimes a bit more harmonized.
Thank you very much, Daniele. For the sake of time, I will not be taking more questions from the audience, but just to thank you for your presentation and your intervention in general. And I would like to welcome our next speaker, Sarah Jane Euchre from EPQ. Thank you. She's co-founder and managing director at EPQ.
Thank you, Alicia. Just let me share the screen.
We can see your screen.
You see the presentation. Okay. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to take part in your event and to present our vision of 2030. Just a short introduction on EPQ. We're an Italian company based in Monza, in the northern parts of Italy. We're an aggregator of flexibility in mainly in the industrial sector. We are a competitor of Enelix, so I'm happy to talk after Daniele, because I share most of the things that Daniele has just said about the challenges we have in the market. Before stepping in our vision, I would like to start telling you a story. It's an example of something that happened very recently to one of our customers, and it was also quoted by Acer director in his speech. You probably all heard about what happened in Texas in February. Texas experienced power outages. They had an extreme winter weather throughout the region. And one of our customers called me the other day saying they were shocked because they received an electricity bill which was 16 times what they expected in February due to what happened. They are an industrial customer which takes part in demand response programs. So they did take part in supporting what happened in the system. The transmission grid operator deployed many resources to reduce the stress on the grid, even including also demand response, but it wasn't enough. So what's happening now is we're asking ourselves, why did this happen? And there are various reasons, but the main reason we believe is the fact that the grid was fragile and the system wasn't resilient. So the message we take home is that in a system in which we talk about decarbonization, electrification, and in which we do live climate change, we do have to build systems which are resilient to confront events like these, but also to confront day-to-day events. How do we do this? We do this enabling flexibility through all the sector elements we have. So this slide is something similar to what has been showed by some of my colleagues before, but it's just to sum up what we mean by flexibility enablers. All the parts, all the components of the system need to do their share to contribute to the flexibility in the system. And so we have on one side generation, on the other we have transmission and distribution systems. We have the development of storage solutions, which are both electrical and thermal, and also flexibility considered in demand-side management, so flexible demand. And in addition to this, we also have sector coupling. So the possibility to generate in the electrification process, to generate heat from power, and also fueling, and also the electric vehicles. So this takes us to discuss what potential we have in the world we're living in. According to the International Energy Agency and according to many of the studies which have also been quoted before, we are not using all the potential we have in demand response. According to the IEA, we will be having a potential which is 10 times higher than it is today by 2050. And we are spending money which could be avoided. We could avoid investments at distribution and investment in transmission grid and on generation if we managed to use flexibility more. So getting to the point of what we see, this is something which in part has already been discussed by our colleagues, but I'll try to add some bits and pieces on the way. So what we have to do is we have to put together and align several fronts. On one side, the market. The market needs to be dynamic. It needs to have a structure which will allow DSF to complete the system complementing the supply of electricity from renewables. What does this mean? This means fair market access to demand-side flexibility. This is what has been in part asked to to Daniele before, asking what are the challenges? And one of the challenges is regulation. We need to have a system which allows flexibility for all shareholders in the system. We're talking about active customers, we're talking about aggregators. We need to consider the role of the TSO and the DSO, considering especially the fact that flexibility is now especially developing at a distribution level. And we need a system which will have price signals, which will be reflecting the value of demand-side flexibility. So we are going that direction. The reforms are being put in place, but this is what we see will happen, and most possibly in 2030 we will be there. And all this will be supported by digital solutions. We will have emerging digital solutions which will be enabling innovation, as blockchain, artificial intelligence. And on the other side, we have a technological evolution which will bring us to have cheaper technology. The cost of low carbon technology will increase the potential also of DR. So we will have storage batteries which will be cheaper. Also, if we consider the synergies in utility scale batteries development with growing battery demand also for electric vehicles. And adding another bit of the puzzle which has not been put in focus by my colleagues before, also the use of hydrogen, especially in low carbon hydrogen development, which will become cost competitive compared to fossil-based hydrogen. So I will add a little bit of focus on hydrogen because it is seen as the most competitive low carbon solution in many applications by 2030. It is on one side, it is an energy carrier, of course. So on one side, it'll be used to decarbonize industry in a large scale deployment of clean hydrogen. What we see in 2030 is an industrial sector which will have processes which will have hydrogen, which will replace fossil fuels in steel industry, in the chemical sector on one side. And then we will be transforming electricity into hydrogen when renewable electricity is cheap and abundant. And this will also help us to provide long-term and large-scale storage and flexibility to the system. So adding one bit of the puzzle, which is hydrogen, we feel that we are going in the right direction. There is more to be done, and we are on the right path if we put all the bits together. So on one side, the market, on the other, technology, and the system, which will improve on a whole. We will have an integration in the system, but we do feel we are going in the right direction.
Thank you, Sarah, for these insights on how you envision reality in 2030. I would like to move on to some questions from the audience. But first of all, I would like to remind our audience to send some questions through the Q&A box in the event platform. Also, a kind reminder that we will be sharing some of the presentations afterwards, and the event is recorded. So you will be able to access also the recordings of the event after today. Sarah, one of the first questions, which sectors will contribute more in the system?
So if we talk about demand-side flexibility, we see a huge potential in buildings and transport. Industries will surely play their part, but looking at projections of where flexibility relies, it's mainly at the distribution level, and it's surely the building sector due to electrification of heat, which will contribute mainly. Industries will surely offer a potential, for example, as I said before, in flexibility from hydrogen production. And on the other side, we see commercial and residential sector with a contribution from electric vehicles, especially on the residential level.
Thank you. We have another question coming up. Which sources of flexibility will be suitable in the different end-use sectors?
Yes, well, I partially maybe answered. On one side, in the industrial sector, we don't see surely electric vehicles, but we see mainly power to heat, so the contribution of power. And also, as I said before, hydrogen. In the residential sector, I would say mainly electric vehicles and also the use of smart appliances would be mainly used in the residential. On a commercial level, it is very similar to the residential sector. It's mainly the electrification. So electricity as the source of heating, which will contribute mainly and will be suitable for the sector.
Thank you. One last question coming up. In Italy, how are system operators activating demand response?
This is a huge question. System operators in terms of aggregators. In Italy, demand response is mainly on an industrial level. So what we aggregate are industries and power generation assets in the market. So what we do is we have aggregations in pools which are minimum 1 megawatt of aggregation level. So yes, it's very difficult today to think of aggregation as a residential or even commercial level. It's mainly industrial and in the generation sector.
All right, thank you very much, Sarah. I would like to now welcome our next speaker, Bjorn Utgaard from EVBox. He is a Vice President Global Industry Segments at EVBox. I see that Bjorn is coming in.
Hello.
Hello, Bjorn, we can see you.
All right, let me show my screen.
Perfect, we can see your presentation.
All right, you can see my whole presentation, right? Excellent.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks a lot for convening this forum. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Bjorn Utgaard. I'm Norwegian, but I lived in the Netherlands for the last 3.5 years. Electrical, mechanical engineer, energy economics by background. Yeah, as I said, I grew up and studied in Norway, but also studied in Japan. So taken a lot of interest in the energy economy for a long time. You may know Norway, for example, exports 90% of its energy production, whereas Japan imports 90% of its energy consumption. So the full spectrum. The reason I am here today is to share with you a little bit of information about EVBox, company I work at, EVBox Group, and also to share with you a little bit our perspectives on what's going on with electrification of transportation and what opportunities that opens up for the energy system. So a little bit on what's going on in the electric vehicle market. There are a lot of initiatives. There's a lot of policy and pretty firm policy commitments as well. As on the left-hand side, you can see incentives for battery electric vehicle purchase. You can also see ICE phase-out targets, 2025, 2030, 2040. I fully expect France to accelerate their plan, for example, and you see that happening. You also see cities implementing zero-emission zones, which is also driving consumer behavior, purchaser behavior in major cities. So this is a very, very massive trend. And that is the market that we are playing in, EVBox Group. Our focus is on empowering forward-thinking businesses to build a sustainable future by providing flexible and scalable electric vehicle charging solutions. We work with corporates, we work with utilities, we work with all sorts of stakeholders that have something to do with electric vehicle charging. And what we offer is a combination of smart charging stations, DC, AC, the full spectrum from the home to the on the go, to the gas station on the go. We have the Everon platform, open enterprise charging management software that allows for integration into all sorts of different business models, whether it's utilities or, let's see, here. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, I can confirm that we can still see your screen.
Okay. I cannot. Okay, so you can see the screen. Okay, all right, perfect.
Yes.
And we do the support and services, and we do so across all over Europe, also in North America. Sorry for that. And as you can see, there's a whole set of solutions speaking to different segments of the market. And yeah, so a lot of the stakeholders here on the forum today will have interest in EV charging, and I look forward to speaking with you. You can reach out to me after the call. What we've seen also is our tremendous growth. We passed 210,000 stations delivered by end of last year, and this is scaling up very fast. You can see very rapid growth. And in terms of the EV market, you're seeing that 5 years ago there was about 1 million EVs on the road. 17 months ago there was 2 million, and then just 10 months ago there was 3 million, and end of 2019 there was 7 million, and it's really accelerating. And so what you're seeing is by 2025 you're likely to see about 30 million electric vehicles on the road. So this is very, very fast. We're getting out of the early adopter phase into the early majority phase of the market. Now, what I want to talk about is how smart charging is key for, especially for residential charging. Anybody who is driving an electric vehicle will know that charging at home is the most practical way to do it if you can. And then it's important for us to look at what's actually the situation at home. And what you can see here is that there's a big difference in the different residential electricity connection that is available by country. You can see in Germany, for example, the average residential connection is 43 kVA, whereas in France it's just 10 kVA. And you can also see the annual consumption figures here. You can see, just for reference, and I'll show you this in the next slide, is you can see an average household in Germany will consume about 3,100 kilowatt hours per year. And that is more or less what an electric vehicle would charge as well. So you can have a doubling of the energy consumption in a residence. But as we will see, that doesn't necessarily mean doubling of the peak. And of course, as you can see, for example, in France, that wouldn't actually be possible because you're also already pretty high to the peak load or the grid connection, what the grid connection was. So I did a couple of simulations here. So let's take, for example, the first one on the left, the Norwegian energy system. So even if you have 100% EV car fleets, you will see that only 3.5% increase in energy demand. Of course, that's somebody you would know. Of course, the Norwegian situation is that there's a lot of industry consuming a lot of electricity. But even in other countries, you won't see a huge energy increase. So it's not an energy issue. And you can see that also exemplified with the French home on the right, where a peak load of 9 kilowatts, you can see that the average load is just about 630 watts. And so you can see that actually the amount of energy you have available under that peak is easily, it's 20 times more than 25 times more energy than you need for the vehicle. So there's a huge amount of flexibility in terms of the residential. Of course, it's also a question of what happens on the distribution feeders and stuff like that, which we will get to in a moment. And then you can see here's a simulation of a resident. So if you have an annual driving range of 15,000 kilometers for a vehicle, that is about 3,000 kilowatt hours, hence the doubling, as we talked about on the previous slide. And then if you know that most cars in Europe can charge at 11 kilowatts, you can see that the hours that you require to charge that vehicle completely for those 3,000 kilometers is just 273 hours. which is just about 11.4 days. So what's interesting is it's not only about when during the 24 hours are you going to charge, it's actually interesting when during a whole week will you charge. You think that an electric car has now easily north of 300, 350 kilometers of range. You don't need to charge the vehicle more than every 3, 4, 5 days, depending on how much you drive. And that opens up huge flexibility opportunities. So the question is, how do we make that happen? You can also look at the different use cases, and you can get a flexibility, good flexibility score in terms of whether you are, if your vehicle is parked at home, whether it's at work during the day, and you can also see that there's considerable flexibility for workplace charging. But in the interest of time, just talk a little bit about the language and the different mechanisms that we enable. So the first thing that you see is it's just about limiting the charging to whatever power is available. Anybody who's tried to get charging stations into a parking garage will notice that the first 2, 3, 5 stations is fine, but you pretty quickly will run into a grid capacity availability problem. So that's where we can limit the power to the group of stations, so that basically we don't consume more than is available on the circuit. Second thing is we can share power among multiple stations, and that's basically saying we'll do a fair share between whatever stations is available. And for example, at work, that's completely fine because you'd only need maybe a 1 or 2 kilowatts, whereas you have 11 kilowatts available on the charger. Then we have smart charging profiles, and that basically means setting different limits of power availability for different times of the day. So, for example, if you have time of use tariffs, there are some very fascinating studies in the US, for example, where time of use tariffs, you basically have very good effect of shifting load from afternoon peak to the nighttime. Problem there is that everybody will then start consuming a lot of power when the price changes. But it works fine for early stages of the market. The dynamic load balancing, that's what I talked about when we looked at the French home, right? Basically, if the charging station is able to respond to the consumption of the building and then automatically adapt its load to what's going on in the building, then that's a very simple way to avoid overloading the grid. And we here do that with EE bus, for example. We're implementing that in our new platform, and we also can do that with OCPP, which is the open charge point protocol. And then the ultimate point, which a lot of the stakeholders on this call may be thinking about, is we can actually also do more advanced integrations with the grid. We work with OpenADR, so we allow integration towards trading systems, demand response systems, and this is where we see a lot of interesting opportunity in the coming years. So just my key points for how we can do this. How can we collaborate, and how can we leverage all this flexibility that is there? The first point is you have to focus on the consumer needs. It has to be a no-hassle experience. People love to think about smart energy as a concept, but they don't like to engage on it. I mean, they don't want to do any action, so it has to be automatic. I think it's very important that there's transparency, right? So if somebody is shifting my load around, I want to know that that's actually reducing my price or actually reaching my targets and not just service providers' objectives. Well, we have to focus on the cost reduction, green electricity, and of course, very, very importantly, the vehicle has to be available for its main job. The second point is, my recommendation is to focus on low-hanging fruits. There's a huge value, as we've seen in the timed charging, just charging at the right time for the resident, for the building, or for the grid. There's a lot of talk about V2G. We are also doing work on that. I mean, our technology supports it, but what I also see is there's a lot of distractions with V2G. People tend to, V2G is so so attractive. I think if I was starting a company, I would probably put some V2G in the name, because I know that I would attract a lot of interest. But when you actually look at it, it's so complex compared to just timing the charging that our focus is first on leveraging the values of time charging, and then we can see what will happen with V2G. And then the third point is it's really essential for us to take an open marketplace approach here. We are seeing in some markets, hundreds of different DSOs potentially deploying different protocols and different needs for different ways of executing direct control, demand control. That's just not workable, not possible. We have to get away from that. It's very essential to get price signals to stakeholders. Hourly pricing, price transparency is what would be a start, which of course is available many places, but also demand response signals and the like. And then we have to standardize communication protocols. OpenADR is, as I said, one of the protocols we're working with, and we'd love to see more of a standardized way of communicating between the different stakeholders. And that's my entry. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Bjorn, for your presentation. Indeed, I would like to take some questions from the audience. First of all, do you think that electric vehicles should be powered just by renewable electricity by 2030 to help penetrate direct electrification in the transport sector?
Well, I think that the electric vehicles are perfectly positioned to help renewable energy comes in. I mean, if you think about what's going on in the energy market, is we're going from a situation where supply was trying to keep up with demand to demand trying to keep up with supply. And as we have seen, there's a huge huge opportunity for electric vehicles to follow renewable energy generation. So that's definitely possible, but I think at the end of the day, it will have to be down to what consumers and customers prefer, right? They should be provided the ability to choose only renewable electricity. And I would love to see that not just being by certificates, but actually being with more of physical coupling timing, so that I actually know that the energy that is being fed to my vehicle is renewable.
Thank you. Another question coming from the audience. They are asking for your market experience. What are the main drivers for your clients to purchase smart charging?
Cost reductions. They are also interested in renewable energy supply for sure, because oftentimes, especially if they're corporates, they're looking at sustainability targets. But it's primarily about cost reductions, and I'm talking about primarily actually just not having to expand that transformer. Cost reductions in terms of arbitrage and things like that is also on the table. But yeah, primarily it's about cost reductions.
Thank you. And I would like to allow one last question from the audience. How many of your chargers are smart ones?
Yeah, so we primarily sell smart chargers. We do have chargers that are not connected to the cloud, but that's not something that we recommend to customers. It's more when somebody has set their mind on having absolute cheapest capability. But even in so we are primarily selling smart chargers, and that's where we think the future needs to go. It's also because we've been doing over-the-air updates since 2012. So and what we also see is that the vehicles are changing fast, and that the protocols are there, the standards are there, but the implementations in the vehicles and in how they actually interpret the language is still evolving. And for us, it's very clear you need to have a cloud connection so that you can update that firmware down the line.
Thank you very much, Bjorn, for joining us today at the Vision 2030
Thank you very
session.
much. And I'll see you in our virtual booth.
See you in the virtual booth, exactly. And I would like to now welcome our next speaker, Mark Oman. He is Senior Lead Energy and Infrastructure at Google. Hello, Mark. Welcome.
Good morning.
The floor is
Thank you.
yours.
Thanks for having me.
Good morning.
All right. Hope you can all hear me and see my screen, which I'm going to make a little bit bigger. Great.
We can see your screen. Perfect.
Yeah, great. Good morning again, and thank you to the organizers for inviting us to this conference. I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes explaining to you Google's journey in terms of both our trajectory and then where we're hoping to get by 2030. This is a company-wide objective that was announced by our CEO in September of last year. And the purpose of my presentation to you today is to just go through some of the details about how we measure this new target and what it would mean for Google and the electricity sector as a whole. So before we jump to our new goal, a brief recap about Google and energy and our journey. So just to give you a data point, in 2019, Google consumed just a little bit less than 13 terawatt hours. Most of that, about 90% of that, comes from Google's data centers. We have somewhere between 18 and 20 hyperscale facilities around the world. And in terms of our energy journey, it's been a three-step approach. We have been carbon neutral since 2007 via offsets. And then in 2012, we announced a higher ambition, which is to reach the 100% renewable energy mark, which consists of matching all of our load with the same quantity of renewables. This is something we achieved for the first time in 2017, and we've been able to stay at that level despite growing energy consumption for the last 3 years, including this year. And so what I'll be talking to you about today is the next goal, the next frontier for us, which is to entirely eliminate emissions by transforming the electricity grids where we operate data centers such that they are essentially carbon-free 24/7. And that's a goal we intend to achieve by 2030. We're the first corporate that we know of to have set this very ambitious goal, and we hope to be able to reach it and to help electricity grids in the process. I think the starting observation that I think people in this audience will be very familiar with is that although 100% renewable pledges are very useful and can play a very useful role in accelerating the penetration of renewables in various grids, it doesn't fundamentally solve the problem or the overall objective, which is total decarbonization of grids. And the main issue for us as basically a large baseload consumer is that the amount of carbon-free generation never quite matches our load. It's in excess at certain hours, and it's a lot less in other hours. And so the challenge we're trying to tackle now is to how to fill in the gaps in terms of carbon-free energy. Now, speaking of just this target, I think it's important to also just outline broadly that essentially our goal is to source a quantity of carbon-free energy that matches our load in all places at all times by 2030. And so the next slide will really sort of explain how we're going about setting this goal and measuring our progress towards this goal. And I'll close the presentation, I think, by giving you a couple of sort of real-world examples of things we are already doing towards this goal, which I think will tie quite nicely with some of the other speakers' presentations in terms of demand-side response. So the general motivation is that we believe national economies must decarbonize their electricity grids as quickly as possible. It's both, the electricity sector is currently a source of carbon emissions, and it could be a way to facilitate the decarbonization of other sectors, as I think other panelists have mentioned. And our goal is that as we look to decarbonize our operations, we won't be able to do so without relying on the grid. And so we're hoping to provide helpful innovations that help fully decarbonize grids, therefore not just our own supply. And we published a paper about 10 days ago, which you can see linked on the right-hand side, and it's available for download, where we outline the 5 basic principles for our decarbonization strategy. So moving away from the global 100% renewable match that we're targeting so far, we're now shifting our focus towards a time-based matching. So what we want to do is to have, looking at each hour, how much load we have and what kind of carbon-free generation is happening in that hour in each grid. That's the second point. When we look to procure clean energy, carbon-free energy, We will focus away from global matches into very local matches, so by regional grids. We want to be technology inclusive, and so it's not just about solar and wind, but it's about anything that can produce power without carbon emissions. So in our definition, it could include nuclear, it could include carbon capture and storage. Additionality is still a key requirement for us. We still want to ensure that essentially the carbon-free electrons that Google helps build and helps add to grids, and which we take credit for, these projects have to be additional. We cannot just contract existing assets, but we do recognize that additionality as a concept it's not always black and white. There's a bit of a spectrum. And as I was saying earlier, our ultimate goal is to broaden the entire electricity grid, which is why, as you'll see the next slide, we do look very closely at the quantity of carbon-free electricity which is already present in grids, which we're not responsible for, but which certainly helps us towards our goal. And so at Google, we've really described sort of a way to think about our carbon emissions through these little bar charts. Starting with the very far left, this is basically status quo if we did nothing. The horizontal line is just the sort of theoretical load at a data center, assume 50 megawatts, a large data center. And you can see that parts of the grid already has carbon-free resources, so that's the green bar. And then above it, you can see that there's plenty of hours where there's fossil generation of power, which leads to our servers being powered by carbon electrons. And on the right-hand side, what you can see is what happens when we contract for carbon-free energy via, for example, the signature of long-term power purchase agreements to help build more generation. In some places, the third bar to the right, we contract so much renewable generation that we have an excess generation. And our ultimate goal is to end up on the far right, which is a world in which in every hour, our operations are fully covered by a mix of the existing carbon-free energy already in the grid, complemented with Google contracted carbon-free electricity. And you can already see some results of these efforts at 3 of our data centers globally. In the Netherlands, in Eemshaven, the grid itself would be basically 24% carbon-free, but thanks to local wind and solar procurement, we've already brought that up to 61%. But obviously the biggest challenge will be how to go up from 60 to 70, 80, 90, and 100. It will get harder as we go higher because adding more wind and solar will not suffice to reach the 100% mark. And you can see the impact we've had in other grids in Iowa and the United States, as well as our data center in Chile. And so now I want to spend a little bit of time on the role for technology and the grids in achieving this 24/7 objective, and give you a couple of real live use case examples of things we've done that we think could have both impact and could be replicated. I guess at a broad level, there's 3 ways we're looking to apply technology to achieve our 24/7 clean energy target. We're looking at ways to optimize existing clean energy production technologies. The second, which I think we'll focus most on, is developing smart solutions for managing electricity demand, which we're part of. And finally, we're looking through policy and other advocacy efforts and procurement efforts to help accelerate commercialization of next generation resources, such as some of the speakers have touched on, such as clean hydrogen. So the first sort of case study I want to share with this group is what we're doing as we speak presently at our data center in Belgium. You can see a photo of it on the right-hand side. We announced in December of last year that we are in the process of building an on-site battery at this data center in Belgium. And so the broader context for us in our data centers is that on the rare occasions when a Google data center is affected by a power outage, we have to be ready to ramp up millions of watts of backup electricity in seconds. And for most data centers, whether it's Google or other data centers, backup power has traditionally been maintained through diesel generators. And so our goal is, by the installation of this battery, demonstrate technologically as well as commercially that batteries can be a substitute for much, certainly not all, but certainly some of the diesel backup generation, which is available or which is currently installed as backup power. And so the fundamental insight is that essentially this is a world in which backup systems at data centers go from being climate change problems, sort of idle diesel gensets to critical components of carbon-free energy systems. Indeed, if we think globally, we estimate that there are about 20 gigawatts of backup diesel generators in service today across the data center industry, which is a really massive opportunity to deploy cleaner solutions. And so, our hope is that indeed, once the data center is up and running, provided there are no power shortages, we can see this battery in Belgium providing a vital role as Belgium in particular has made the decision to transition away from nuclear, and therefore will be relying on more intermittent resources, and therefore be more heavily reliant on energy storage solutions to maintain the reliability of the grid. The second case study is something we announced in April of 2020. And the insight we had, or the problem we're looking to solve, is that historically Google data centers were operating very much as baseload generation. And when users, for example, uploaded a large YouTube video, the algorithm that decided which data center would be processing that video and encoding it was geared towards harmonizing the spread of workloads across our data centers in a homogeneous manner. And so a few years ago, we asked if we could not reverse engineer the problem and say, instead of deploying workloads in a homogeneous fashion, could we not optimize so that data centers that work the hardest happen to be those where the energy that is powering the servers has the highest carbon-free content, i.e. when there's the most wind or the most sun. So it's basically load shifting in two different dimensions. A geographical dimension. Data center A could be cleaner than data center B, and so the workload should be allocated to data center A instead of data center B. And the second dimension is that time shift, where data center A could be cleaner the next morning or that evening. And so it's a matter of delaying the processing of the signal to those hours where we know that there will be higher amounts of carbon-free resources in the grid. What's interesting is worth noting is that we've been able to run this pilot without incurring any new hardware costs or any impact on the performance of the services for our users. And so we hope that systems like this can find broad applicability within many companies and industries. Early results of this study are promising. It's still a pilot, but based on, we're still assessing the carbon impact of this work, and it will be dependent on how electricity providers respond. But we believe that this could reduce the average daily carbon intensity of our electricity consumption by as much as 3% when scaled globally. My last slide is just a summary. I won't go into too much detail, but in order to achieve our 24/7 vision, we believe that it has to be an all of the above strategy, where we will look to continue to procure from solar and wind. I just talked about storage and flexible technologies, which we're investigating. And we're also helping to spur further innovation and act as a partner for carbon-free technologies, such as carbon capture and storage, geothermal, low-impact hydro, nuclear, as well as sustainable biomass. We believe that all of these components will be needed if we're to achieve our vision of totally decarbonizing electric grids by 2030.
Thank you very much, Mark, for sharing with us Google's vision for 2030, and of course also your roadmap to actually sourcing or to achieving your goal of sourcing carbon-free energy for all your operations at all times, in all places. We have a few questions coming in from the audience, so I will just jump right into it. Do you also aim to reduce embedded carbon from the appliances that make up your data centers, as well as water usage?
Absolutely. Yes, these are two critical components in the journey towards a sustainable future. We just published our 2020 sustainability report, which details some of our efforts. We track very closely all the waste and recycling of all the components used in our data centers, and we try to use refurbished servers wherever possible. We're also starting to share more metrics about water usage. There's obviously different ways to cool data centers. Some of our data centers have air cooling, but certainly not all, and it's not possible everywhere. And so I think managing, being good stewards of the water resources is another crucial angle in our sustainability journey.
Another question coming in from the audience is, are you thinking about ways of making that excess energy, primarily heat from your site, usable for others?
Yes, that's also something we track very closely. I think it's important to keep in mind that hyperscale data centers are typically located away from population centers because they're so large, because they draw so much power. They're usually closer to big nodes of the grid. And so there isn't always a reliable use for the heat, which is not high-grade heat. So there are certain limits to the usefulness of this heat, but we're constantly investigating ways to work with the local communities where local data centers are based, whether it's an animal fishery that could use some heat. I think the one message we've heard repeatedly from our leadership is we don't want to fund heat reuse projects that are just beauty contests, but that don't have true intrinsic commercial applicability. If it's just a one-off, it's probably not worth doing. But if there's systematic efforts and projects that have high enough IRRs that other industry players can scale them as well, we'd be happy to take the lead. And so those are the kinds of heat reuse projects we're looking for, those that don't really require heavy subsidies, but that can pay for themselves over a number of years.
All right, thank you for that. Another question is, does Google plan to integrate any of its own fleet of electric vehicles in your solutions?
It's a good question. It's a little bit beyond my scope of knowledge, so I hope the answer is yes. I would hope so personally. I don't know the answer to your question.
All right, thank you very much, Mark, for your presentation and for answering the questions of our audience. I would like to now welcome our next speaker. She's Ranjani Madhavan, Global Strategic Marketing Manager at Siemens. Ranjani, welcome.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see me. Hello.
We can hear you. We cannot see you at the moment.
Okay.
There
we go. And yes, I see that. And you're able to see my screen, are you?
We can see your screen, and indeed, we see the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. Perhaps if you put the presentation mode on, that would be ideal.
Yeah, does that work? Just confirm it's working. Thank you.
It is, indeed, we see the presenter view. We see the presenter view at the moment.
Is there a way that I can?
Yes. Moment. Normally, you can decide. You can choose on your own the display that you want to share.
Okay. Sorry about that. How am I able to change presenter or?
You click on display setting.
All right. No, Ranjani, I think it's okay if we just continue like this. We still can see the presentation.
Oh, okay. So, hello everyone. Sorry about the technical glitches over here. So my name is Ranjani, and I'm the strategic marketing manager from Siemens. And here I am to present to you an overview of what the vision of a grid interactive smart building of the future eventually looks like. So I would still like to see if I can. Because my my screen comes in over here. Screen, okay. Now do you see the PowerPoint other one?
Right now we cannot see your presentation, Ranjani. Yes, now we
Okay.
see it. Perfect. Now we see the screen.
Okay. Because I was seeing myself, so it was becoming difficult. So thank you, everyone, and thanks for giving this opportunity, of course. So buildings, from the Siemens perspective, we're doing a lot of work around the grid interactive building for a very long time. And what we see is that as buildings account for 75% of electricity consumption and comparable share of peak power demand. So with many adjustable loads, buildings can be an essential part of a solution that can contribute to issues and offer a broader range of grid services to help meet other electricity system requirements. And applying such control strategies over various timescales to loads like lighting and air conditioning as such, and also to distributed photovoltaic systems, energy storage, EV charging, as we just saw, and microgrids. Buildings can provide essentially demand flexibility by, as you see, number one, reducing the overall consumption from fossil energy source, providing load shifting, storage, and grid stabilization capacity, and essentially enabling
Ranjani, sorry to interrupt you really quick. We cannot see your screen anymore. We're just gonna quickly try to solve this in the background. Apologies for that. We cannot see your screen anymore.
Nothing?
Now we can see your screen right now. Yes.
Okay, in the presentation mode?
Yes, normally right now we can see it in the presentation mode, indeed.
Okay, okay, so now hopefully it works. So these 3 points which I just mentioned, so such demand flexibility is the core characteristic, as we would establish from Siemens, core characteristics of a grid interactive efficient building. And a grid interactive efficient building expands demand flexibility options beyond traditional demand response, as you may, because of smart technologies like advanced sensors and controls and analytics that can actively manage distributed energy resources and adjust a building's load profile to co-optimize energy costs, grid services, and occupant needs in a continuous and integrated fashion. In the future, of course, both some of them also asked about residential and commercial buildings. So what we believe is that in the future, both residential and commercial buildings will continuously manage loads in the environment of the distributed energy resources to better serve the needs of building owners, occupants, utilities, and also the regional grids. So what is a grid interactive smart building? Grid interactive smart buildings need to enable, like one of the colleagues also, one of the presenters also presented about essentially the most important part is to enable an interoperable infrastructure. And hence this interoperability needs to be not only physical, but also digital. So it needs to coexist in an environment of an optimized digital and physical infrastructure. They should be able to manage their energy flow, store renewable energy, and eventually they will act as prosumers at the grid. This will support the consumers to behave as prosumers at the grid, where they are participating in the energy markets. The established infrastructure can monitor and self-manage the load. And as we know, commercial consumers eventually make up 30% of the total energy consumption throughout Europe. For these consumers, heating and cooling are the main sources of consumption, and these could be as much as 80%, which is why commercial buildings could be seen as the immediate storage source in Europe. Home occupants have the growing ability using a variety of timers and controls to determine precisely when during a day or night, for that matter, their home's energy hogs, like hot water heater or the electric car charger, and draws power. And this timing is extremely important. It matters because it will allow home occupants to take advantage of time-varying electricity prices schemes in which power suppliers are charged more when energy resources are scarce and vice versa, and less when energy resources are plentiful. So I would like to conclude by essentially showing you the outcome or the elements that are directly impacted through a grid interactive building. So grid interactive buildings support multiple energy related goals, including greater reliability and resilience of the power grid, reduced electricity costs through peak management, achieving renewable energy and energy efficiency targets as such. And also, essentially, grid interactive buildings play a very important role in lowering air pollutant emissions, and also manage greatly the affordability factor. By cost effectively, eventually through smart building mechanisms, reducing energy use and peak demand, and participating in the utility programs and electricity markets for a broad range of grid services. The grid interactive buildings and demand flexibility can keep down electricity costs for households, businesses, institutions, and the like. Additionally, not to forget that in a controlled and efficient way, when energy is managed across the entire grid edge, this has a direct implication in lowering carbon emissions and hence supporting decarbonization as such. Digitalization is the key lever that is driving this interoperability and managing this complex infrastructure that we're talking about. I will close by saying that we are now really in the middle of this evolution, and now is the time to really participate and take action. And this evolution to a grid interactive building as the general political and social consensus also of the Green Deal actions eventually providing the tailwind. Thank you very much. And sorry for the technical glitches. Please do visit our virtual booth where we present also the decarbonization white paper, where we have explored in detail the various technologies that can support decarbonization as such. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ranjani, for your presentation and for giving us your vision of grid interactive smart buildings of the future. We have a couple of questions from the audience. I would like to jump right into that. First of all, they're asking for your experience. What are the most significant benefits of smart energy consumption?
Right. I think that's a very smart question. I mean, generally reducing peak demand and overall consumption are, I would say, the two of the most convincing benefits of a smart consumption. In addition, owners can support their green sustainability goals and potentially generate revenue out of it. And because buildings with smart consumption capabilities know how most effectively and efficiently the electricity usage can be established, and when to deploy on-site generation resources, at what how much to store when they need it most. These facilities are no longer, they are not passive consumers. They now become active participants in the in the electric supply chain. And because of this ability to proactively manage the energy consumption, they support grid stability, and they reduce the need for utilities to build more power plants and add to the capex for that matter. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ranjani. Follow-up question from the audience. Do you see this capability as being a central part of any renovation wave activity? How do we achieve this?
Any renovation? Say that again.
Do you see this capability? Do you see this capability as being a central part of any renovation wave activity? How do you achieve this?
I mean, for that matter, I mean, from Siemens, the larger portion of the market we address is really this, you know, the 90% stock of buildings is already built, for that matter, globally. So renovation, of course, for that matter, that would definitely involve additional, you know, energy efficiency infrastructure within an existing building, modernization techniques, and establishing this interaction with the grid by implementing digital tools and techniques, for that matter. So Siemens is doing a lot of work in this area of modernization and renovation, as you're talking about in the, as we would say, a brownfield project, and not necessarily you need to start from scratch to kind of establish this when you are, you know, creating an infrastructure or something like that.
Thank you very much, Ranjani, for your intervention. And thank you to all our speakers of the Vision 2030 session for sharing their vision of their companies for the future, and joining us today in this special day for us of our flagship event, the Smart Energy Summit 2021. Before we move forward to the next sessions of our event, I would like to hear from our audience, actually. So you will see in a moment a poll, which I really encourage you to answer. Our vision is that every company, car, and building have opportunities to support a more variable energy system by 2030. What is your opinion? Full alignment? Agree, but it might be difficult for some sectors. Do not agree, as still too many barriers to eliminate, but by 2030, it is too optimistic. I see already some answers coming in very quick. We will wait for a couple of seconds to have some more feedback from you. I remind you to join Slido. You can go to slido.com and introduce the code that you see there, hashtag X114, for those that haven't joined yet. All right, I see some more answers coming in. Let's wait a couple of more seconds. All right, I would say that we close the polls here. We can see that the majority agrees with this vision that we share here at smartEn, but they do see that it might be difficult for some sectors. And I would like to encourage you to share on the chat in the Q&A box what you think are the sectors that it would be most difficult with, and what the main challenges would be. All right, let's move on to our next sessions. We will have from 12, as from midday, as from 12, we have already our virtual booth time. Indeed, we have dedicated from 12 to 1 p.m. an hour for our sponsors' virtual exhibition. To visit our sponsors' virtual booth, you simply need to click on the virtual booth icon at your screen. You can see it on the menu on the left side of your panel. From 1 until 2 p.m., we will have a lunch break with a networking opportunity. You can simply look at other attendees' profiles, for instance, by going to the people section again on the virtual event platform panel, looking for the people that interest you more, and clicking on the chat bubble icon to initiate a conversation or a video conference with them. After these breaks, we will come back with our next session. We will have an inspirational speech with David Wallerstein. He's Chief Exploration Officer at Tencent. For that session at 2 p.m., we will be back at the conference at the afternoon stages session. Thank you very much and see you at our virtual booths.
to my chin. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Many men try to reach it, many men have failed. Well, if you wanna get to heaven, you gotta raise a little hell. And I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They say no to sleepless nights. Will you find me? Hope you find me. I'll be back home soon. When the sunrise, when the We're trying to catch me out of the Trying to catch me out of the There's dirt on my hands, strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon. 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 When it rains, it pours. Water's up to my chin. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Many men try to reach it. Many men have failed. Well, if you wanna get to heaven, you gotta raise a little hell. And I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They say no to sleepless night. Will you find me? Hope you find me. I'll be back home soon. When the sun rises, when the sun We're trying to catch me howling at the moon. Trying to catch me howling at the moon. I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon. 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 When it rains, it pours. Water's up to my chin. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Many men try to reach it. Many men have failed. Well, if you wanna get to heaven, you gotta raise a little hell. And I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Will you find me? Hope you find me. I'll be back home soon. When the sun rises, when the sun Well, try to catch me howling howling at the moon. Trying to catch me howling at the moon. Trying to catch me howling at the moon. Trying to catch me howling at the moon. When it rains, it pours. Water's up to my chin. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Many men try to reach it. Many men have failed. Well, if you wanna get to heaven, you gotta raise a little hell. And I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. Facing all the sleepless nights. Will you find me? Hope you find me. I'll be back home soon. When the sunrise, when the We're trying to catch me howling at the moon. Trying to catch me howling at the moon. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Many men try to reach it, many men have failed. Well, if you wanna get to heaven, you gotta raise a little hell. And I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. Will you find me? Hope you find me. I'll be back home soon. When the sun rises, when the sun came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree. There's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They sing on a sleepless night. Try to catch me howling at the moon. When it rains, it pours. Water's up to my chin. Won't stop fighting to the very end. Many men try to reach it. Many men have fell. Well, if you wanna get to heaven, you gotta raise a little hell. And I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon. They say no to sleepless night. Will you find me? Hope you find me.